Hey, this is Jamie with Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite games that I think you'll enjoy if you love Scythe. I did a video like this for Wingspan, a game that I published but didn't design. Scythe, however, is a game that I both publish and design. Here's our complete rulebook for Scythe, rather than the Scythe box. My Scythe box is the big legendary box. It's pretty heavy to lift up to the camera here. So if you know Scythe and you like it, you might have different reasons why you like it. Feel free to share them in the comments below if you want. I have gone through and listed the 10 things that I think makes Scythe special to me, and why I think maybe people enjoy Scythe. And I've applied a game to each of those categories, and I rank those games based on how much I enjoyed them. That's how I'll do the top 10. Before I jump into that, I did ask Stonemaier ambassadors. Actually, no, before I jump into that, let me mention two games that won't be on the list because they are published by Stonemaier Games. If you like Scythe, I think you'll also really enjoy Tapestry. So I picked two Stonemaier games that I think have connections to Scythe. Tapestry is an asymmetric game, just like Scythe. Tapestry has you pulling tokens off your player mat to get better stuff throughout the game. Turns in Tapestry are really quick and simple. There's some other things that I'll go through and list in the longer format video here. But I think if you enjoy Scythe, you'll enjoy Tapestry. There's also interactions on the map in Tapestry. The other game that you might guess that I'll mention from Stonemaier Games, where if you enjoy Scythe, I think you'll also enjoy My Little Scythe. My Little Scythe is Scythe kind of streamlined and distilled down to some of the core, really fun elements of the game. It is more family-oriented than Scythe, but you can have fun with My Little Scythe with all age groups. And I'd highly recommend checking it out if you really enjoy Scythe. So those are two games from Stonemaier Games. Now I'll jump into the ambassador picks. So the ambassador picks are Stonemaier ambassadors, Stonemaier volunteers. I just asked them, if you love Scythe, what game would you recommend to someone else? And some of the games on their list were Anachrony, Beyond the Sun, Blood Rage, Clans of Caledonia, Deus, Dwellings of Eldervale, Rurik, Dawn of Kiev, Eclipse, Hansa Teutonica, Terraforming Mars, Underwater Cities, Tyrants of the Underdark, and Rex. And Rex I might mention a little bit later in relation to one of the other categories. But yeah, so let's jump into the top 10 list. The number 10 game on the video, and I'll be able to hold some of these up. I don't have all these games. But at number 10, the category is asymmetry. So a big part of Scythe is asymmetry. The player mats you have are different than the other player mats, and the factions in particular, from faction to faction in Scythe, are very different. And one of the games that's really made a name for itself because of its asymmetry is Root. Root also has other similarities to Scythe in terms of like combat, a little bit of area control, other things that you're doing in relation to your player mats. But asymmetry is the core feature of Root, with the things that you're doing with your faction in Root are very different than what other players are doing. Much more different, really, than the things that you're doing in Scythe. In Scythe, you're doing the same core actions as any other player, but the things that you're doing. The things that your faction can do are different than the other players. And I think asymmetry adds a lot of replayability to Scythe. Same thing with Root. And so Root is my number 10 game on this list for asymmetry as the core feature of Scythe. At number 9 is Villainous. I have the Marvel Villainous, and Villainous could also apply to asymmetry, but the reason I'm mentioning Villainous is because in Villainous, you have these player mats that you can see here, and on your player mats, you have top actions and you have bottom row actions. And one of the things that I think works really well at Scythe is that on your turn, you typically take a top row action, and then if you can afford a bottom row action, you take it. And so it feels really good, I think, in Scythe to be able to have the resources to take those bottom row actions. It feels like you're actually getting an extra thing out of your turn. You're getting 2 actions instead of 1. In Villainous, it works a little differently in terms of you always get all the stuff. You almost always use all 4 actions, if there are 4 actions, 2 top, 2 bottom, on a section of your player mat. And then you are choosing a different section on your next turn. Similar to Scythe. You're choosing one section and then choosing another section on your next turn. So you're not just repeating the same thing over and over. In Villainous, the top row is used a little bit differently in that opponents can play fate cards on your top row to block your top row actions, to actually take them away from you. And then you still have access to the bottom row actions. So I like that it was implemented very differently in Villainous, but I love the top row, bottom row system on the player mats in Villainous. So that's my number 9 game for this list. And number 8 is Near and Far. I turned it because I thought I had it, but no, I have Sleeping Gods, the new game from Ryan Lockett that is similar to Near and Far, and might be on this type of list in the future. But for now, Near and Far is a game, for the category of Near and Far is the encounter system. So I think the encounters inside are one of the things that make it fun and unique, in that you can choose to have encounters on certain areas of the board, and encounters are always a good thing. You go to encounter, you have a few different options, and you choose one of those options and get a good thing, whether it's free or whether you pay for it. And I couldn't find too many games that do this, in that you are opting into the encounter and you're always getting a good thing. But Near and Far is pretty close. In Near and Far, you're not always walking away with a good thing, but you generally are. And in Near and Far, you are choosing to have encounters. So instead of you kind of randomly drawing an encounter card, or always having an encounter happen, or if you stumble upon something and an encounter happens, inside, I think it's really crucial that you are choosing to go after encounters. You're choosing to have them. And that is the same thing in Near and Far. You are choosing to have those encounters. And if encounters aren't for you, if that's not something you're interested in having, you can just avoid them in Near and Far. So Near and Far is the number 8 game on this list. At number 7 is Combat, the combat category. Combat was the thing that was the toughest for me to design inside. It started off very random, and as I evolved the design, it became, I gave players a lot more agency in terms of the decisions they made in going into combat. And Scythe is really a lot more about the threat of combat than it is combat itself. But I learned a lot from a game called Kemet. So Kemet is the game that I'm recommending for combat for this list. And I mentioned Rex. I'll mention Rex a little bit in a second. But Kemet is, if you enjoy Scythe, Kemet is one of the huge inspirations for Scythe, because and in Kemet you have some interesting decisions that you make during combat. You're kind of being sneaky with some cards, and you're revealing one of those cards as a special combat card, and you can even have some extra cards that you can hide behind that card. And I do the same thing in Scythe. So you have these combat cards that you can hide behind your combat dial. Your opponent doesn't know if you're even playing combat cards or not. And the same thing goes in Kemet. But the other thing about Kemet is, if you lose combat, you don't really lose all that much. You're usually kind of just pushed off the board temporarily, or pushed to an adjacent territory. But you can come back and join the fight if you want to on a future turn. And so I really like that idea that there isn't a lot of destruction or punishment or feeling of loss if you lose combat. It's just something that happens in Kemet, and you get back in it afterwards. I tried to go for the same thing in Scythe. You're not destroying mechs. You're not destroying units in Scythe when you have combat, or characters. They're just pushed off the board, and they can come back later and fight again if they really want to. I do want to mention Rex too, because Rex, even though I hadn't played it at the time that I designed Scythe, it does use a combat dial to kind of indicate how many resources you're going to spend in combat on that turn, and you have to spend those resources no matter how combat is resolved. So I think Rex is a good example for this category too. But Kemet is officially my number 7 pick. At number 6 is the category of components and art and world building all together in one. How whenever I play Scythe, I feel really immersed in the wonderful world building that Jakub Brzezowski created for the game. And the game that came right to mind when I thought of this is a new game, and that is Tidal Blades. I think Tidal Blades does a fantastic job of doing a lot of things that Scythe does in terms of engine building and choices that you make. It's a very rewarding game, but the world of Tidal Blades is just so immersive. I love all the world building that went into this this kind of island driven world. These characters have wonderful backstories. The locations they're going to, it really feels like they're kind of gearing up for a big fight. They're going through these different trials. They're learning at different areas and competing on these different areas of the board, and then fighting these incoming monsters. It's a beautiful game. I love the art direction, the graphic design, and especially the world building in this game. And Mr. Cuddington, this couple of designers, of artists, are people that I worked with for Charterstone too, and they're wonderful to work with for world building and art. But yeah, this is my category. This is my game, Tidal Blades, at number 6 for components and art and world building. I think they did a fantastic job with it in this game. At number 5, or the top half of the list here. So number 5, at its heart, Scythe is an engine building game, and a lot of the engine building happens when you take an action where you gain something, and you typically gain 2 things. So like when you take an upgrade action in Scythe, you're removing a cube from a benefit. So you're making a benefit better, and you're placing that cube on top of a cost. So in the future, that cost will be less. The enlist system is usually double rewards, where you're right away gaining an immediate reward, and then on an ongoing basis, you have a reward based on what you enlisted, the recruit that you enlisted. There's lots of instances of this in Scythe where you're actually gaining 2 rewards, sometimes 1 immediate or sometimes 2 in the long term. But again, another engine building game that has that double reward feature is Orleans. Orleans is a very different game. It's a bag building game. But in Orleans, whenever you gain a new worker to add to your bag, not only are you gaining a worker and making your bag engine better, but you're also immediately gaining a bonus on a track on the board in Orleans. For example, I think if you gain a blue worker in Orleans, you gain the worker, you have that blue worker from then on, and you immediately move up on the blue track and gain coins based on where you are on that track. I love that engine building feature tied to the double bonus, especially if there's an immediate bonus and then a long-term bonus through the engine building. And Orleans, I think, is a fantastic example of this. That's number 5 on my list. And number 4, lots of games I could have picked for this category, many of which are kind of already have been mentioned here. But one of the great things I think about Scythe is that turns are quick. You're not taking a bunch of different phases on your turn. On your turn in Scythe, you're usually doing 1 action. And sometimes, if you are doing really well, you take that top row and that bottom row action. You take 2 actions. But turns are fairly quick in Scythe. And I love games that have quick turns, where it kind of just flows from one turn to the next. And I picked Dune Imperium for this game, because I think the turns in Dune Imperium and a lot of the other elements of Dune Imperium feel like Scythe, and they're very quick, simple turns that you're taking, and then you move on to the next player. Dune Imperium probably isn't the best comparison to Scythe in terms of the flow of the game, because Dune Imperium is broken down by rounds instead of just letting players take turn after turn. I think that flow of Scythe is pretty important. Maybe I should have put that on this list. But in Dune Imperium, I love how short and simple the turns are, and yet how satisfying they are, and how meaningful every turn is that you take in Dune Imperium. So that's number 4 on my list. Getting to the top 3 here. At number 3, we have popularity. So one of the features in Scythe is that you have this popularity track that determines, inside that determines how much you're going to score at the end of the game for each territory you control, the resources you control, and I'm totally blanking on the last category now. What's the last category in popularity? Resource and money. Nope. Yep. Money? Not money. It's not money. I'm blanking on my own game right now here. Let's see if I can look at the rulebook and find out. Yeah, so popularity, I gotta find a picture of the board so I can remember. For each star, of course, the stars that you've earned throughout the game. Another game that uses a popularity track like this is, the wonderful game, is Architects of the West Kingdom. This uses a virtue track in a very different way. You're kind of gaining points directly on this virtue track at the end of the game, but your position on the track really feels super thematic in this game, in that you can gain virtue and gain access to certain benefits, but you can't go to certain other areas of the board, or you can go negative in virtue and be allowed to go to the black market, but you can't do other things because of how this village or the world views you as being as having very little virtue. So I actually think the track in Architects was done even better than the popularity track inside. I think popularity track is good to pay attention to inside. You can make decisions inside where you lose popularity, both on encounters and if you if you move into a territory where there are opponent workers. But I love how the virtue track in Architects you have to kind of pay attention to it throughout the game because of how it impacts the decisions you're allowed to make in the game. So I'll choose Architects as my number 3 game for its similarities to Scythe's popularity track. And number 2, Scythe has an element where you're racing to get 6 stars, and you're earning these stars by achieving different goals. But in the end, it's the most money who wins. So even though there is a race in the game, what matters at the end is who has the most money, and money is points in the game. And another game that does this, that that I love if you watch this series, is Clank. In Clank, you are racing throughout a dungeon, ideally to be the first person to leave that dungeon, which puts the pressure on the other players. The game, unlike Scythe, the game doesn't end right away when someone leaves the dungeon, but there is a race to do that. But what matters at the end of the game isn't who got out first, but who gathered the most loot while you were down there. And that loot all converts to coins. And so the winner at the end of the game of Clank is whoever has the most coins, exactly the same as in Scythe, with that race element paired to it. Clank also has engine building. It has a lot of other elements that I've mentioned here today. But it's a wonderful game, and I love that racing element of Clank, tied to whoever has the most coins at the end of the game being the winner. But number one is one of my favorite games, and a game that really provided a huge amount of inspiration for Scythe, and that is Terra Mystica. So this is in the category also of engine building, but specifically in terms of removing tokens from my player mat to improve your engine, improve your income, improve your ability to take actions. And that is Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica just does a fantastic job of having these robust asymmetric player mats where you're pulling tokens off these mats, you're putting them on the map. In Terra Mystica, you're actually pulling some back from the map and then putting them back on your player mat. But I love the progression on your player mat throughout the game, how you just get better and better at different things, different branches, different paths throughout the game. And it feels really good to take those different paths in Terra Mystica. And Terra Mystica, beyond that, was just a huge inspiration for Scythe in terms of the way the board works and other elements of the game that are rewarding. The engine building, the asymmetry is a huge part of Terra Mystica. All that asymmetry, all those things kind of tie back to Scythe. When I talk about Scythe, I talk about how Kemet and Terra Mystica were the two big inspirations. A lot of these other games I played later. I think I played all of these other games later after I designed Scythe. But yeah, Terra Mystica is my number one game that I would recommend if you love Scythe. So yeah, I hope this video is helpful to you. If you love Scythe and you're looking for a game that has one or more of these elements, hopefully this list is helpful for you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you love Scythe and there's another game that you recommend to others who love Scythe, and you've had a good success at doing that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that in the comments below. Thanks.